na panukala sa mababang kapuluan ng Kongreso. Anong panukala po ito at sino po yung mga authors?
We're working on the CLIMA bill, the Climate Accountability Bill, and the authors are myself, our committee chairman, and our other vice chairmen, so senior vice chairman, Josie Limcayco, Christian Dalian, Fernando Cabredo, and also Juan Roman Alba.
Ano po mga nakapaloob dito? Sino po ang mga makikinabang o sakasakali?
So this climate accountability bill hopes to help parang increase the chances of decarbonization, parang facilitate that through regulatory parang reporting, parang a general framework for doing business, creating also a fund para ma-access ng mga vulnerable communities, of course subject to institutional mechanisms that are parang for example through a quasi-judicial board that will help in validating the claims and dispersing the funds. And then the bill also provides for criminal liability in addition to that's already provided for in special laws.
Ma'am, kailan po ito na-file sa Kamara at nakailang reading na po ito?
Na-file siya last year.
Last year.
And right now, nakatatlong technical working group na kami, technical working group committee meeting, and then we're going on our fourth next week. Nasa stage po kami na nire-refine namin yung remedies under the bill.
Ma'am, I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, meron pong CLIMA bill, yun po yung sa inyo. And meron pang isang bill, the Low Carbon Economy Bill. Ano pong kaibahan ito sa dalawa?
So the Low Carbon Economy Bill naman is parang tailored to the nationally determined contribution implementation plan. So parang it's to help sectors bring down their carbon emissions. And also parang it helps local businesses comply with the GHG reduction by outlining certain pathways, including getting them to park some of their funds to an internal carbon fund that will help them to adjust transitions.
Ma'am, napakabigat po itong kapag sakaling naipasa na po, napirmahan na po na isa batas. Kasi kayo po ay isang mambabatas and hindi po lingid sa kaalaman ninyo na ang kapwa niyo mambabatas, may-ari ng mga minahan, may-ari ng mga quarry at kung ano pang mga kontraktor na kung saan konektado dito sa inyong pinaglalabang climate justice. Paano niyo po ito ipupush?
This is why the Low Carbon Economy Bill parang actually presents friendlier options for compliance. So it's not so much punitive, it's more to help us move the needle through regulatory compliance. And then in terms of the climate accountability bill, of course we're very mindful of the fact that under the Paris Agreement, we don't speak of reparations, we speak of cooperation to facilitate the distribution of aid for loss and damage kasi maraming communities na beyond na talaga yung capacity nila to adapt to or mitigate yung nangyayari na experience sila na loss and damage. So parang this is the balancing of interests that we will also need to convey to our colleagues and also those parang so that we all have to understand that we're in this together and it's all in our interest to move the needle for our planet and for the country.
Medyo lack of time na po itong bill na ito, ma'am, kasi po November na po ngayon at ang mga congressman mas malupit pa, mas malala pa sa kolehiyo kasi marami po silang recess. Paano po maihabol ito eh?
Even naman when we were on break, we still had technical working group meetings. So in all likelihood, that will continue even when we're on recess. We're given permission.
Ma'am, marami po mga kababayan natin, hindi lang isang grupo, kundi libo-libong grupo na nagsusulong po sa climate justice to protect our climate. Do you have any panawagan po sa ating mga kababayan?
one of the most vulnerable countries in the world. The least we can do is try to help each other in whatever way we can. It doesn't have to be just through this climate accountability bill. It can be through the more concrete actions such as choosing to go with renewables, choosing circular economy measures parang that you can adopt in your own lives. Marami pong platforms also that and lifestyle choices that you can adopt to bring down your greenhouse gas emissions. So hopefully parang with concerted action, we can all make a difference.
Good morning. In 2020, the House of Representatives adopted a resolution by the Committee on Climate Change, which I had chaired, to declare a climate emergency. This declaration was made to ensure enhanced and coherent climate actions in the executive and legislative agenda of the government. One of the salient points of the declaration was to call on the major carbon emitters, locally and abroad, to take responsibility for climate change and to reinvest in renewable and sustainable energy. In November 2023, I filed the Climate Accountability Bill, or the CLIMA Bill, together with several congressional representatives to concretize this call. At the time of its filing, CLIMA was a world first. Today, it is potentially the first of its kind in Southeast Asia and in the Global South. CLIMA recommends the following major pathways for accountability from carbon majors. The first is to adopt a due diligence framework where carbon majors report their emissions and climate-related disclosures, as well as make necessary steps to transition to clean energy. The second is to submit to a remediatory pathway where carbon majors who refuse to shape up may be litigated by affected communities. And the third is the creation of a fund that communities affected by climate loss and damage can access. On this third point, I am particularly interested, having seen the impact of large-scale disaster on Bohol itself. In 2022, the province was one of the hardest hit areas by Super Typhoon Odette. Estimates peg up to 11.1 billion pesos, $215 million in damages to agricultural crops and farmlands, and another 17.5 billion pesos or $330 million damages to homes, roads, electricity, and water lines. Before Odette, the Philippines was visited by several deadly typhoons. Yolanda was by far the deadliest and the costliest. The typhoon damaged 1.1 million houses, destroyed 33 million coconut trees, a major source of livelihoods, and pushed approximately 2.3 million people into poverty. Overall damage is estimated at $13 billion. Typhoon Sendong affecting Mindanao and Ondoy, mostly affecting Marikina and Rizal, similarly wrought havoc on the lives of Filipinos, especially the poor and the marginalized sectors. Loss of lives was also tremendous during these disasters, not to mention the non-economic losses arising from displacement, forced migration, trauma, among others. The Philippines is the most disaster-prone country globally, according to the recent World Risk Index. It is poor and marginalized communities who are bound to suffer the most from disasters because of their underlying vulnerability and weak capacity to bounce back from disasters. It is precisely for them that the CLIMA bill has been introduced. A climate reparations fund that will be created under CLIMA will go a long way in helping communities recover and rebuild their lives after a climate loss and damage event. But the bill also sends a strong signal to carbon majors to shape up, to begin the necessary task of minimizing their emissions and paying up for climate loss and damage. Whilst the Philippines is not historically a huge contributor to emissions triggering global warming, it must do its share in combating the crisis under the principle of common but differentiated responsibility. For justice is at the heart of the Klima Bill. As a country facing extraordinary negative climate impacts, we must do our share to honor our commitment to the Paris Accord, as well as provide vulnerable communities the means to respond to inevitable climate loss and damage. Thank you so much and good day.
Hi, my name is Elisa Morgera. I'm the UN Special Rapporteur on Climate Change and Human Rights. I'm sorry I can't join your important policy forum today, but I hope my thoughts on loss and damage can contribute to your deliberations. And I will be keen to stay in touch and hear about your key messages and follow-up actions in due course. I would first of all welcome the focus of the forum on youth and women, and I would also recommend specific attention to children and girls and children's human rights in the context of understanding what are the mechanisms needed to address loss and damage, and also how we can then develop national policies to ensure that local communities and those frontline communities most affected by climate change can really benefit from any actions that can be taken to address loss and damage. As I discussed in my first report to the Human Rights Council, there has been now significant work across a variety of UN human rights experts and bodies to clarify how climate change is negatively impacting on human rights in very unequal ways. And this has been the case for children, for women and girls, for indigenous peoples, for peasants and small-scale fishers, for persons with disabilities or persons with albinism, and for communities who are already facing racial discriminations or structural marginalization. And so we need to take into account and really put central into the evidence base on any decision on climate change, including loss and damage, the lived experiences, the needs, the understandings of those human rights holders who have been most affected by climate change. And this is really crucial to then think about the human right to effective remedy, which is really how we understand loss and damage from an international human rights law perspective. And to me, there are two key points to keep in mind. First of all, that we have a full range of possible remedies, and it is important to really explore how each and every remedy from a human rights perspective can contribute to meaningful responses to loss and damage, but also how some remedies can contribute to a cycle of prevention. And so critically, what are we learning in identifying and addressing loss and damage that can help us to avert and minimize further negative impacts of climate change on human rights that occur despite our mitigation and adaptation efforts? And in that context of understanding loss and damage, very much looking at loss of life and human health and livelihoods, but also the loss of territories and associated ecosystems and cultural heritage that very much undermine also the coping capacities of many communities and individuals. In that context, I would also recommend looking into this year's UN Secretary General report on loss and damage, that discussion around the human right to remedy, and really reflecting on how different remedies can make distinctive contributions to loss and damage, both in terms of restitution, compensation, and rehabilitation, but also the point around guarantees of non-repetition. And this is really where that cycle of prevention can come in. The third point I would like to emphasize is a point about process, a human rights-based process to identifying and responding to loss and damage, and also to that point of preventing and minimizing further loss and damage. In that context, the report of the UN Secretary General suggested taking a transitional justice approach And I think this is quite a key point to reflect upon, in that the conversations on loss and damage have been very difficult between global north and global south country. And we need to find processes that really support a genuine dialogue, where we focus on truth telling, but equally we focus on truth listening. And the other point from a human rights perspective, making sure that those dialogues and any pathways for access to justice and remedy in the context of loss and damage are really age friendly, including children friendly, gender responsive, and disability inclusive. And so again, it's both about recognizing and centering the evidence based on the lived experiences of those most affected by climate change, but equally having a direct conversation and having making sure that any barriers are removed for their direct participation in relevant conversation and decision-making processes, be that at the international level or at the national level. And the final point, which is complementing those I've just made, refers to my second report, which I discussed at the UN General Assembly in October this year. And it's about the importance of access to information on climate change and human rights, and really bringing together a comprehensive evidence base on the climate change impacts on human rights, and again, on the diversified and disproportionate impacts of climate change on human rights, as an essential basis for then the protection of any other human right in the context of climate change, as well as the exercise of those human rights in the context specifically of minimizing and preventing, as well as addressing loss and damage. And so the comprehensive evidence base needs to bring together research and knowledge that may be in separate government departments and separate areas of research related to all human rights, looking at tenure issues, impacts on biodiversity, weather and disaster patterns, but also impacts on cultural heritage, on human health, on livelihoods, and very much relying on disaggregated data to understand differentiated impacts on different sections of the population. And the comprehensive evidence base is essential for public authorities to understand how foreseeable and preventable some of the negative impacts of climate change are, and how they need on that basis to take more holistic and effective and inclusive measures to address climate change and to address loss and damage. But equally, the public needs to have access to that information to understand the magnitude of actual and potential negative impacts on human rights of climate change and of certain climate response measures, and to be able to assess the adequacy of state and business responses to effectively protect our human rights in the context of climate change. But that information is also essential for civil society in supporting the resilience and adaptive capacities of people, particularly those in vulnerable situations, to respond to diverse impacts of climate change and to address loss and damage. I think that comprehensive evidence base, that comprehensive information can and should be supported by community-led initiatives to develop the research and the information necessary. And in my report, I have recommended that states prioritize and provide funding for community-led, including women-led, youth-led, and children co-led approaches to that information gathering and analysis. And so I will close just by encouraging you to reflect on to what extent those lived experiences of loss and damage by those human rights holders that have already been most affected by climate change are integrated in decision-making at different levels, and what are the barriers to that integration. Also, what we have achieved so far and what remains to be done to ensure genuine dialogue on effective remedies, and really thinking about the full range of remedies available under international human rights law, including with a view to feeding into that prevention cycle, and really capturing all the learning that is available within the participants in this policy forum to understand how we can, in a most inclusive way, address and understand loss and damage, but also prevent any further predictable loss and damage from happening.